It's Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance, joined today by Marty Block in Sacramento. He's a member of the California State Senate. So I'd like to speak with you about a scourge on our society, and that is the crime of human trafficking. What exactly is human trafficking?
Well, human trafficking can be forced labor. It can be from people brought into this country from foreign countries, and a lot of times that's what people think about.
Right.
But more increasingly, human trafficking is occurring with the victims being Californians, young girls usually in middle school, 12 and 13 years old.
We have a family friend whose daughter was trafficked. And, you know, arguably, I live in a well-heeled area, and she was 16 and she ran away for a night and she was gone for 3 months.
One of my constituents told me a story about one of her daughter's friends who went on a joyride with a couple high school kids. She was in middle school.
Right.
And she thought she'd be gone for an hour. She didn't come back for more than a year.
Oh, God.
And that's what got me involved in this whole human trafficking issue.
Right.
It is a terrible...
And you represent significant portions of San Diego where arguably you could see international trafficking come through, but also domestic. I mean, you're just in that border region, and so you must see a lot of this horrible event.
That's right. San Diego is one of the leaders, unfortunately, in human trafficking because it is the merge. It's the same kind of domestic trafficking that we see up and down the state, but internationally added to it.
So I have learned that oftentimes these, and we'll call them victims, they will become prostitutes. They're forced to become prostitutes, and they may be charged with solicitation, with prostitution, and then they're able to escape, but they still have this charge on their record. Under current law, what can happen with that charge if this individual would like to see the charge removed?
Sure. Under current law, Louis Alejo had a bill last year that allows them...
Louis Alejo.
Yes. Allows them to expunge prostitution, solicitation, convictions from their record.
What does expunge mean? Because I've learned there's a difference between expunge and vacate.
Yes, yes. The expungement process is where a judge basically seals the record, so in most cases you don't see that there's a criminal record, but there is still a conviction. The person has been convicted, but the record is hidden. So that on job applications, applying for housing, a person doesn't usually list a conviction that's been expunged, and there's no way for the landlord or employer to find out.
But you believe that there should be a remedy beyond expungement.
Yeah, my bill, SB 833, calls for vacating judgments, which means that it never occurred.
I see.
The offense, the conviction itself never occurred once a judge vacates a judgment.
Now, I understand there are some DAs. I believe Jackie Lacey in Los Angeles County is looking to avoid even charging these victims. But there are plenty that are still charging and for prior convictions. How will this process move forward, assuming the bill passes?
Well, Senate Bill 823 is different than Assemblyman Alejo's bill in a couple of ways. First of all, it's vacation of judgment instead of expungement, but also this deals with crimes that Alejo's bill did not deal with. His bill just dealt with solicitation and prostitution. This bill deals with other crimes that victims of trafficking sometimes commit while they're in captivity.
I see. So vagrancy, loitering, drug offenses,
shoplifting. For example, the person who's captured this young girl, I call them girls because they are 12 or 13 years old in many cases.
Boys.
Yeah, and boys, that's correct. But the captor will say, go into this convenience store and steal me a pack of cigarettes or a bottle of beer. And the person really has no free will. There's not a gun held to their head, but they don't have free will. So they go and do it. And then what happens is if they're caught and then they're prosecuted, they have this conviction that stays on their record forever. It haunts them forever. This bill we call the Clean Slate Act because it really does give them a fresh start when they get out of that lifestyle, when they're able to restart their life.
And so they would file a petition, and the judge would have to look at the evidence, look at the facts, and then make a determination.
Yeah, this bill says there's a presumption that if the person was captive while they committed this nonviolent offense, then that they didn't do it of their own free will.
How do you prove that you were captive? That's part of the process.
Yeah, that's incumbent upon the person, the defendant, to show that they were captive at the time.
I want to talk about the nonviolent question. Because let's say that that same young girl was told to go into that liquor store, get some beer, get some cigarettes, and steal some cash. And here's a gun. She doesn't shoot the guy. She doesn't shoot the attendant, but she uses the gun to get the cash. That crime is then violent, even though no one was hurt. Why not allow that young girl to seek expungement?
Well, in this particular bill, we don't allow that for two reasons, really. One is in deference to victims. I mean, if a gun's involved in a crime, let's say, or if there's any other one of a number of violent crimes, there is such an impact on victims, even if nobody's hurt. If there's a gun involved in the crime, there's psychic damage. We do want to be deferential to people who have been victimized.
I hear you. I hear you. But look, I always think about Patty Hearst. You know, Patty Hearst in the 70s, she was the victim of the Stockholm Syndrome. She was kidnapped and forced to do all these criminal acts, and ultimately, I believe she was pardoned for her criminal behavior. She used guns. And so, I mean, I got to think these young girls are Stockholm Syndrome textbook.
Yeah, I agree. The second, and yet, despite the motivation of these young girls and the fact that they are Stockholm Syndrome victims, it still does have an impact on the other people if they commit subsequent crimes. So that, I mean, let's say they murder someone.
Well, that's okay. But could you, look, I know it's the art of the compromise, but let's just play it out. Could you create a scheme whereby if the crime was violent, but shirks away from human harm, let's say, that the standard becomes higher?
We could, and even in our bill with the nonviolent crimes, we still give the judge complete discretion. A judge can decide that in this particular case, the victim knew full well what he or she was doing and did it for their own gain, not because they were under captivity. So in a violent crime, we could have the same discretion for the judge. The real reason, the most important reason we haven't included violent crimes here is really just a practical one. This bill probably wouldn't make it through the legislature if violent crimes were included.
It's the art of the compromise. I get it. Yeah. So let's talk about the bill in its current form. How is the bill faring? Because I can envision certain tough on crime groups being a little spooked by this, even though the victim may be at a certain level, you feel compassion for them, but they still are spooked.
Sure, and the DA's Association, the Statewide Association of District Attorneys, has taken an opposed position on this bill. Yeah, and you know, a lot of our DAs in San Diego, Bonnie Dumanis, are really good when it comes to working with trafficking victims.
Has Ms. Dumanis taken a position herself?
She has. Well, her office has, which is really her position, against.
Interesting.
And I think, and not to put words in their mouths, but they're so used to, so focused on prosecuting bad people, putting the bad guys in jail.
Are these bad guys?
Well, that's my argument is these aren't bad guys. These are mostly good people, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old girls who are put in horrific situations and may be forced to do bad acts. So I think they should be excluded from this mindset that DAs seem to have. And I've been arguing with my local DA and with the other DAs about this. But right now we don't have their support. We do have the public defender's support. We've got the Junior League of California.
What about some of your Republican friends?
My Republican friends, so far the bill has gotten some bipartisan support.
Okay.
Not huge Republican support,
but
some.
Still, I mean, because criminal justice reform is cutting across party lines.
That's right.
I mean, it's a very interesting dynamic.
That's right.
I mean, there are plenty of Republicans, dyed-in-the-wool conservative Republicans that are looking at our current criminal justice system and saying, this is broken. And so, do you have a sense about where the governor may be on this? I assume he signed Mr. Alejo's bill.
He did sign Alejo's bill, and we're very hopeful he'll sign this bill too. I mean, he's shown that he believes in looking at all of the facts of criminal cases. And here, in the final analysis, you've got a young person who, against their will, is taken out of their household, out of their community, prostituted up and down the state.
Does the person have to be a minor? No.
No, not in this bill.
Okay. His name is Marty Block. He's a member of the California State Senate. My name is Brad Pomerance. We're in Sacramento today on Local Edition.